We are not curious enough about each other to do the hard work of finding out who they are. We are not curious enough to ask questions, to question the things we've heard, the stories we've been told. We prefer to cling to our identities and say, I'm an X, so I don't do Y. We stick to our kind because it's safe. But how far will that take us? Look at what it's doing to us, how afraid it's making us, how much it's depriving us of life-transforming experiences. In the absence of curiosity, what are we left with? Fear, and a determination to destroy that which we are afraid of.
Many of us live in some kind of in-between. Even now, as the pandemic starts to ease, we live in between the before and the after, the in-between of not knowing when or how it will end. And when it does end, what will our lives look like in the new world? Quote, I live in the space between, Imbolo Mbue says in this talk. Quote, it is the immigrant's burden to live with a body in one place and the heart in another. I'm Rebecca Hoogs, the Interim Executive Director of Seattle Arts and Lectures. You're listening to Sal on Air, a collection of talks from the world's best writers from over 30 years of Seattle Arts and Lectures. In this episode, recorded on June 7th, 2019 at Town Hall Seattle, Imbolo Mbue describes how her in-between began in Cameroon, where she was born, and continued in New York, where she traveled to attend college. She stayed, attended business school, got a job in New York City, and then, in 2008, she lost her job in the Great Recession. She saw, during this time, the great economic stratification of New York, and the seed for her book, Behold the Dreamers, was born. The book went on to be a New York Times bestseller and an Oprah Book Club pick. The book asks the questions we all inherently struggle with. What is happiness? And what makes a good life? What would we be willing to do or to give up for ourselves, for family, for love, and for dreams? Imbolo's compelling characters defy easy answers. At its core, this book is a love song for dreams and for dreamers. In the talk, she also touches on the book she was working on then, and which was published this winter, How Beautiful We Were. We are lucky for the space that Imbolo Mbue's words made in the air that night, and for the space her words continue to make in the world today. This is Sal on Air.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love when I get to go after a musician and a poet. Now I feel the pressure to sing or to say a poem, but I'm not good at either, but I'm so delighted to be here. This is my first time speaking in Seattle. And when I got this invitation, I was very excited. I always wanted to live in Seattle. When I first came to America, I spent a lot of time watching Sleepless in Seattle. And I thought I was going to meet a guy who looks like Tom Hanks and get married and move here. It didn't work out. My husband doesn't look like Tom Hanks, but I'm just very happy to be here. So before I came to America and I had fantasies of marrying Tom Hanks, I grew up in a town in Cameroon called Limbe, which I'll tell you more about later. But just a few months before I came to America, something happened, and I'd like to tell you a story of what happened to me. Specifically, this happened to me on the day I graduated from high school. My high school was a private all-girls boarding school. It was one of the best high schools in my country. Many of the girls who came from there, they came from very wealthy families, unlike me. My mother wasn't wealthy. She was far from wealthy. I only went to this high school because I had relatives who helped sponsor me to go to this school. But it never bothered me that we weren't rich. I worked hard in school and I had outstanding grades. So at our graduation ceremony, which is the case in a lot of graduation ceremonies, awards are given to students with the best performances. There was one particular award that was very special. It was a trophy given to a student who had excelled in a certain combination of subjects. And I was one of the few students in my class who was eligible for that particular trophy. So I knew I was in contention for that award. So before graduation day, a couple of my classmates said to me, "Oh, Imbolo, we think you're going to win this award because there's only a handful of girls who are eligible and you have one of the best grades in class, so we think you're going to win this award." And I'm not a competitive person by nature, and I didn't let talk of the award get to me. Before I continue, I just want to acknowledge Reggie Reggie and Omar, because I was listening to them in the back. Thank you for that music, Reggie, and thank you, Omar, for that poem. Just wanted to say that. So back to my award, which so everybody was saying, "Oh, Imbolo, we think you're going to win this award because you're very smart and you're eligible for it." So graduation day came, and when the winner for the award was announced, it wasn't me. The trophy went to another student who also met the criteria, a very intelligent young lady, a classmate who I always admired. So I clapped and I smiled, and she went to the podium and she collected her award. And after the ceremony, I won other awards, so I took the awards I won, and I went and I celebrated with my family. So later that day, after the festivities were over, and my classmates and I were back in our dormitories, other classmates started coming to me, and they said, "Imbolo, you were cheated. That award was yours to win. Everybody knows it. The only reason the other student won it is because her family is wealthy, and yours isn't. That's just the way the world works." So I listened to them, and I made no comment. And in the silence, I realized something. I realized that I needed to decide what story to believe. Did I not win an award because my mother was not wealthy, or because the trophy wasn't mine to win? The choice on what to believe was entirely mine. What others believed was completely immaterial. I could believe whatever I chose to believe. And what I chose to believe that day was that my classmate and I were both worthy of that trophy, and she won it. End of story. My classmate had excellent grades, and she was an exemplary student just like me. If the only thing that separated us was how much money our families had, so be it. I refused to let the experience change how highly I regarded that classmate. So recently, I was in my hometown last year, and that classmate of mine invited me over for dinner to her house. It was my first time seeing her since high school, and she'd grown into a lovely and most generous woman, as pretty as back when we were teenagers, which is not an easy thing to pull off. So I thought about that graduation episode, and I realized what a loss it would have been for me if I'd chosen to believe the story the other girls were telling me. Not only would I have gone around with hurt feelings, I would have grown up to believe that certain things would not happen to me in life because I wasn't born into money. And I haven't found that to be the truth. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about that episode in my life and the power stories have over us. My classmates told me a believable story, and I refused to believe it. Why? Why do we believe certain stories and not believe others? Do our beliefs and interpretations have anything to do with the story? Of course not. Our beliefs and interpretation of a story have nothing to do with the story and everything to do with us. It has to do with who we think we are, what identities we choose to hold on to. We can't claim we believe certain stories because we heard it from a reliable source. Even the best of parents have told their children stories that ended up not to be true. Even the most reputable media outlets have given us false stories. We can't say we believe it because it seems so factual. It doesn't take much for fact to be exposed as fiction and vice versa these days. I recently watched a documentary that claimed a deceased pop star was a pedophile. I believed every single word the victim said. Why? Because I identify with voiceless children. But what would I have believed if I had been a victim of false public accusations? On my high school graduation day, I identified as a person with potential. And when my classmates told me a story that suggested my potential meant nothing by itself, I refused to believe it. Identity, is a beautiful thing and a dangerous thing. Beautiful because identity gives us a sense of belonging, which is, as human beings, we need. But identity is also a very dangerous thing because one identity is all it takes to shape a person's life, for better or for worse. One identity is all it takes to alter our interpretation of a story. One identity is all it takes for a colorful world to become black and white. And let's not deceive ourselves that it's safe to identify as X but not as Y. An identity is an identity and potentially costly. You only need to turn on the news to see what devastations they've brought to the world. The strange thing about an identity, though, is that we don't always make a conscious decision on what to take on. Often, we inherit our identities from our families, or we pick it somewhere in our communities. Other times, the world takes it upon itself to tell us who we are. The world tells us a story, and we accept it. The story I was told about myself when I came to America was that I am an immigrant, which is actually true. I came from another country into this one. But the thing is that story never felt real to me. I never walked around with a strong immigrant identity until the day I wrote a story that was in part about the struggles of an immigrant family. And I had to answer many interview questions that began with, "So, Imbolo, as an immigrant, what do you think of Donald Trump?" And then I started giving responses like, "Well, as an immigrant, I have no comments." Actually, I never said that. I have a lot of comments. But despite all the interviews I did, I never mentioned to any interviewer that while I might be an immigrant, I identify more as an emigrant, which is somebody who leaves his or her own homeland. One of my favorite novels of last year was called Small Country by a French writer named Guy Fay, which was originally published in France as Petit Pays. In it, the narrator is looking back on his boyhood before Burundi fell into a genocide, forcing him and his family to flee to France. Watching the news one day, he remarks as he sees migrants in makeshift boats washing up on European soil. Public opinion holds that they fled hell to find El Dorado. Bush. What about the country inside them? No one ever mentions that. So I'd like to tell you about the country inside me and what happened after I left it. I was born in the southwest region of Cameroon, which is one of two English-speaking regions in a mostly French-speaking country. If you've read about Cameroon in the news lately, it probably has to do with the violence that has engulfed the English-speaking regions ever since a separatist movement sprung up to create a new country for the English speakers because the English speakers feel very marginalized. And the predominantly French-speaking government sent its soldiers. And for the past couple of years, villages have been burned, places in which I spent my childhood have been deserted, thousands are now refugees. There's no saying when peace will return, but in my childhood, Cameroon was an emblem of peace in Africa. I spent most of my life in a town called Mbue, which is my hometown. I loved Mbue a lot, and still do. On school days, I walked with my friends for about an hour to attend a public secondary school. After high school, my relatives sponsored me to come to America to go to college, and I arrived there about 20 years ago in 1998. Within hours of my arrival, the relative I was traveling with suggested we go to a famous American restaurant and have something called a burger. I'd heard of this thing called a burger, but I'd never tasted one, so I was excited to drive to the restaurant. And then we got to McDonald's. And I learned that there isn't just one kind of burger. There are about 20 different kinds of burgers. So I'm looking at the menu, and I had to decide between a Big Mac and a double cheeseburger and a quarter pounder and a double quarter pounder with cheese. And not being accustomed to so many choices, because in my hometown, we had one of everything. You want to drink milk, the whole town drinks one brand of milk. Not being used to having to make such decisions, I said, you know what, I'm not going to have a burger anymore. So I looked at the menu, and I saw something called chicken nuggets. And I got a bit confused, because I didn't know chickens have a thing called nuggets. I told myself, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to try this chicken nuggets thing, whatever part it is. So I did, and I loved it. And for many years, McDonald's chicken nuggets had a very special place in my heart because it was my welcome to America moment. So after having my chicken nuggets, I took a plane that evening to continue to Chicago, where I was to live with relatives until I started college. It was during my stay in Chicago that my homesickness began, a deep, unremitting longing to go back home. I wanted nothing more than to go back to my hometown of Limbe, see my mother, be with my friends, walk around the open-air market in my hometown, stroll up and down the streets filled with familiar faces. I like to say it was the Chicago weather, that living in a warm seaside town for a cold city would make anybody want to flee. But it was more than the weather. It was many other things, including the reality of America, so unlike the America of my imagination. The America I encountered in those first days was nothing like what I'd seen on television in Cameroon. The people I met did not live like the characters on The Cosby Show. They did not drive cars like the guys on Beverly Hills 90210. They didn't have the kind of wealth I'd seen on soap operas like Dallas and Dynasty. I'd imagined before arriving here that somehow I would seamlessly slide into a new life. America would be like Cameroon to me, my home, but I'll have a lot more money, of course, because isn't that the promise of America? Instead, I had to deal with the fact that many immigrants I met seemed defeated, tired, cynical. The broader country did not appear to be much better. My friends and I laugh when we talk about it. Why didn't we hear about this other America before coming here? We ask ourselves. We blame the media. We say they sold us a sanitized version of America. Whatever happened to honesty? In blaming the media, though, we forget that Cameroonian TV viewers, just like TV viewers the world over, are humans. And as humans, we prefer beautiful stories that come with endings with bows nicely tied at the top. The American media gave us what we sought. And why shouldn't they? Did we really want to hear about Americans left bankrupt by medical bills or innocent men stuck in solitary confinement? Did we want to watch TV shows about children going to sleep hungry in the wealthiest country on earth? Did we want to listen to testimonies of industrious men and women who worked from sunrise to sunset yet remained in debt? No, Cameroon had enough of its own troubles. We needed to believe that there was somewhere better out there. The glorious America, the idea of America, gave us hope. Only when I arrived here did I learn there was something called racism. Only then did I learn of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King Jr. Funny though, I knew a great deal about Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations, but I never heard about the plight of Native Americans. Only after I arrived here did I hear about people being described as homeless, a phenomenon which was all but non-existent in my hometown. During those months of acute homesickness, I forgot all about the shortcomings of my hometown, particularly the overt classism that always bothered me even as a child. I forgot that I left my hometown because the opportunities there were few and reserved for those connected to the powerful. Dreams and their achievement are the center of my novel, Behold the Dreamers. But having dreams and high aspirations was never a part of my culture growing up, largely because of the scarcity of opportunities. Without opportunities, by what means would one's dreams be attained? What we had in Limbe, in the absence of dreams, was a sense of contentment. If you couldn't change your circumstances, you found peace with it and celebrated life for what it is. But contentment, of course, is not an American ideal. Oh, I just want to be content, said no America I ever met. There's an obsession with happiness in this country. I'm in awe of how desperately people pursue happiness in this country, how much decisions are made based on what will make someone happy. Why should we as Americans be content when there's so much to be discontent about? I don't completely disagree with that way of thinking. Would we have iPhones today if we were content with our cordless phones? Should we be content with a mediocre government? Of course not. This country became what it is today because of men and women who dreamed. While I would never call myself a dreamer, I'll admit that hearing Americans talking about dreaming big and going after dreams and never giving up on dreams opened my eyes when I came here to a whole new way of living, one of the many blessings that this country has given me. And yet, fascinated as I was by the dream culture I was living in, I could also see up close the price of high ambitions. I saw the long hours of work involved, the broken families. I read about diseases caused by stress. It made me realize what an unappreciated gift contentment is and how special our lives were in Limbe, even in the absence of modern amenities. As a young child, I lived in villages with where my mother worked as a community development assistant. The houses in which we lived had no electricity or running water, but I don't remember ever wishing that our lives were different. I would say I had a very happy childhood. We were happy not because we pursued happiness, but because we recognized that happiness is a byproduct of freedom. We were free because we had the basics in life. Our house in Limbe had electricity but no running water, but that was part of the fun, going with my cousins and my friends to fetch water and chatting as we walked back home with our buckets of water on our heads. Even relatives and friends who lived in what Americans would call a hut, their lives were full because there was a great sense of community. People were happy because even though they didn't have much, they had the basics, the weather was beautiful, and we lived by the ocean. When my novel first came out, one of the first reviews of it made a mention of my childhood and said I'd grown up in extreme poverty. And I said, yikes. I wish I hadn't read it in keeping with my principle of not reading reviews. But a couple of my friends read the review and loved it, and they said I should read it. And it was a glowing review, but I had a very hard time getting over how my childhood was mischaracterized. I have no doubt the reviewer's use of the term extreme poverty came from a positive place. I've met the reviewer, I'm a fan of his, and I knew he was simply trying to illustrate how far I'd come from being a small-town African girl to an American novelist. The reviewer was hardly the only American to make such an assumption. But the truth is that I did not know poverty till the day I came to this country. My toughest financial struggles came after I'd finished college, when I was in between jobs like bank teller, dental office receptionist, department store sales associate. At one point, I worked as a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesperson, which was as bad as it sounds. Back in those days, I had this ugly 1989 Honda Civic, which didn't have AC or anything, and I had to buy a fan and put on the dashboard. And then I drove with this vacuum cleaner around New Jersey, and then I had to carry up flights of stairs to sell it. And I'll go to people's houses, and then let me demonstrate to you how wonderful this vacuum cleaner is, and then I'll vacuum their living room, and then they'll say, oh, thank you, I'm not going to buy it. And it was obviously a very, very, very hard time. What I learned during that period of being very poor, what I learned about American poverty, is that it is a vicious thing. It is dehumanizing, it is undignifying, it is relentless. It flattens you and flips you over, and flattens you some more on the other side. Poverty wasn't half as shameful in my hometown because we had other forms of wealth. A poor man could walk tall because he had a good wife and healthy children. But the American poverty I encountered had a way of depriving one of the ability of enjoying other forms of wealth. On top of that, one goes around with an awful sense of being a failure because you're living in a country where you're surrounded by riches and proclamations about how if only you could work harder, your life would be better. Well, I stopped selling vacuum cleaners at some point. My life did get better. I got my master's from Columbia with the help of a professor who got a scholarship for me. I got married, I had children, I became an American citizen. I became a novelist. I made my home in New York City. I got invited to speak at Seattle Arts and Lecture. Though not in that order. And it was nowhere as smooth as it sounds. This past September was my 20th anniversary of living in the US. 20 years, and I still don't believe I'll ever be able to lay claim to the country the same way as the people who were born here. I live in a space between, and so does my writing. It is the immigrant's burden to have a body in one place and a heart in another place. An animal can only strut so proudly out of its natural habitat. As immigrants, we speak often of all what we left behind. Even the immigrants I know who left dangerous situations, places they no longer wish to return to, they still carry their countries within them, just like I do. They stand on whatever foundation was laid for them there. Migration, be it immigrating, entering a country, or immigrating, leaving a country, it is all consuming and transforming. There's no separate column to tabulate the losses and the gains. They all mix together, ever present, a shadow at every turn. We lose a sense of total belonging living in another country, and yet we gain opportunities. We're in awe of the wonders of our new country, and yet we long for what only the old country can give us. Away in a distant land, those of us who cannot physically return home to visit do so in our spirits, because our sanities demand it. No matter where we go, we carry our birthplaces with us, never apart from all that it gave us and filled in providing for us. We seek its warm air on cold days, imagine its sunshine when clouds cannot be subdued. We see long-lost faces in a sea of strangers. We hear a voice and remember a story from a distant evening. A love song breaks our heart, for we remember the ones we once lost and lost in this chase after the wind. Some days we spend hours on YouTube watching video after video, music videos hits from back in the days. We try the old dance moves. We think of some party. Those were the days. That was the most perfect time to be alive. Why did we come here? It's a question we often ask. Did you come here for work, for family, for a better life? What is a better life? That's the question a fellow immigrant recently asked me. He said his life in his country was far better than the life he has in America. Then why did you come here? I asked him. To stay alive, he said. My life was in danger back home. I considered what he'd said. I came for an education and a chance at career success. He came to stay alive. A friend of mine came after a bitter divorce to heal a broken heart. What were we all seeking in common? Freedom, of course. Freedom, ultimately, is what the American dream promises. Freedom to pursue whatever it is that we want. And for us, a quest for freedom is a quest for home, because home is freedom. When I began writing my novel in 2011, home wasn't at the forefront of my mind. Cameroon was my homeland, but New York City had adopted me and given me the home I'd long sought. My inspiration for the novel was the Great Recession, in part because I was unemployed after having lost my job during the financial crisis. And because I was unemployed, I had a lot of time on my hands. I started writing a story about two families, one the family of an immigrant chauffeur, and the other the family of a Lehman Brothers executive he works for, and how these two families were affected after Lehman Brothers collapsed to usher in the Great Recession. My life had been affected by the financial crisis, along with the lives of many people around me. So I wanted to explore how these fictional characters were also affected. But the wonderful thing about writing, or at least my kind of writing, is that you set off writing one thing, and by the time you're done, you've written something entirely different. I was certain while I was writing this novel that it was very much about the fall of Lehman Brothers and how it shaped the lives of the story's characters. Even months before the book came out, I still thought that. That is until I had a meeting at my publisher and somebody said to me, "So, Imbolo, what would you say this story is about?" And I gave an answer, and everybody in the room said, oh, no, that's not what it's about. Don't worry, we'll tell you what it's about, because we're your publisher, and we know your book. So they told me. And after the novel came out, readers and journalists and academics all told me. I was told the book was merciless in its depiction of the American dream. When I went to France, I was congratulated by several journalists for writing a book that warned prospective immigrants that America was no promised land. I've been told by readers that the story is about family, about marriage, about the American dream, about New York City, about choices, about failures, about lies, about immigration, about home. The assertion that the story is about home is perhaps the one that most took me by surprise, because I never set out to write about home, and yet characters are always thinking of the home they left behind, the way things were, the dream of homes they hope to someday own and in which they will raise their children. A young man from a wealthy family leaves his home on a quest for true peace. In a scene that takes place just before Lehman Brothers collapses, the executive, Clark Edwards, sits with his chauffeur, Jende Jonga, by the Hudson River to watch the sunset. They talk about home and family and everything in between. Jende says a man can find a home anywhere. Clark reads a mediocre poem about home. The last word in the novel is home, ? I've been asked about that. Imbolo, the novel ends home. What does home mean to you? Where is your home these days? Are you finally at home in America? New York City has given me the home I'd long dreamed of finding in America, and in the process, it taught me a lot about home. It has pushed me to learn how to be at home anywhere, because my home is a faraway place, and a nearby place, and a place around the corner. Some days it's easy to arrive and settle in. Other days I can barely see its roof, so covered in fog. There are stretches of time when I'm surrounded by strangers in the newest of places, and yet I'm at home. From one day to the next, the distance between my home and the place where I stand fluctuates. It depends entirely on me how far or near my home is, because home is a choice. In accepting my evolution of the notion of home, I've also accepted that I'll no longer have the same sense of belonging in my hometown like I used to do when I was growing up. Like the characters in my novel, I recognize that this immigrant life expands and contracts ones in unanticipated ways. The person who returns to Cameroon to visit is 1,000 miles removed from the person who left it. Life happened to me. America happened to me. Last year, I went to my hometown for a visit. My cousin and her husband picked me up from the airport, and we were driving back home. I asked my cousin, I said, can you tell me how to get Wi-Fi? And she said, what is Wi-Fi? And I said, come on, it's 2018. Limbe is a small tribe in town. How can you not have Wi-Fi? And she said, we don't have it, never heard of it, sorry. I said, okay, I let it go. So a few minutes later, she said to me, wait, are you talking about connecting on a network to get the internet? I said, yeah. She said, oh, you're so silly. It's not called Wi-Fi, it's called Wi-Fi. So she starts laughing at me, laughing really hard. And later she tells everybody, oh, Imbolo's saying Wi-Fi instead of Wi-Fi. What is Wi-Fi? It's Wi-Fi. Learn how to say it right. So only later did I realize that Wi-Fi is a French word for Wi-Fi. And with my country being mostly French-speaking, the French words move around. And so if you're ever in France, please make sure to say, excusez-moi, je voudrais le Wi-Fi, s'il vous plaît. But on that day, I didn't know my cousin and I were speaking two different languages. I was simply reminded of how much I no longer belonged in my own hometown the way I used to. I was different. I was not like them anymore. It took me back to when I first came to America. My friends here would laugh at me the way I pronounce certain words, and then they'll spend so many minutes teaching me how to say it the right way. And I'll say, good luck with that. This accent is not going anywhere. People love to talk about assimilation as if it's something you can go to a store and buy. Hey, why don't you put your old ways in the trash and go to CVS and buy some new American ways? The politician Bobby Jinda supposedly referred to immigration without assimilation as an invasion. This view, of course, comes from the notion that the marginalized have to adopt the ways of the dominant culture. Immigrants have to adopt the ways of native-born. African Americans should act less black. Gays should behave a little straight. The message is, try to be more like us because we are the norm. Come further into our world, otherwise you might end up at a disadvantage. Recently, I was listening to Michelle Obama's memoir, where she talks about her time at Princeton, about how most of her friends were other black students. She talked about this idea that black students on college campuses should stick together. They shouldn't stick together. They should make more of an effort to be part of the main campus culture. And she asks why. Why should the burden of assimilation be on us? And I said, amen to that. Why should we be the ones making most of the effort? Why can't native-borns make more of an effort to come further into our world? I'm not talking about going to Thai or Indian restaurant or doing yoga, even though it's really good to be flexible. I'm talking about going into the temples of foreigners, attending their festivals, learning how to say hello in their language. Some of us pat ourselves on the back because we went on vacation to Vietnam and visited a village, or we traveled to Kenya and went into the slums. But what about doing similar things in our own hometown, in our own towns? But in Imbolo, you might say, it makes no sense for us to venture into your world. You guys are the ones who came into our own country. Well, in that case, why don't we all adopt the customs of Native Americans? If I'm saying all this, it's not because I've mastered the art of opening myself to other cultures very different from mine. I struggle very much still. I realize what a long way I still have to go, and I recognize that if I were to cling less to my identities, it would be so much easier for me. This all came into focus for me 2 years ago when I was speaking in the lovely town of Savannah, Georgia. Because I was speaking there in February and the weather was warm, 2 of my very close friends from college decided to come and spend the weekend with me there. So after my talk, which was on a Saturday, my friends and I went out to dinner, and then we had a whole night to fill up with fun stuff. And my friends decided, of all things, that they wanted to go see a burlesque show. First of all, I barely even knew what that was. It just didn't sound like the kind of thing I do. There's certain kinds of things that I'm not into, and a burlesque show sounds like one of them. But my friends couldn't care less about my likings. They wanted to see burlesque dancers, and since they traveled to be with me, I grudgingly went to see the show. And I said, this is interesting. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and I looked forward to calling my husband the next day and say, guess who went to see a burlesque show? So we left the burlesque show. One friend went to the hotel, and my other friend said, it's only midnight, let's do something else. So I hadn't seen this friend in 10 years. I wanted to spend one-on-one time with him, so I said, okay. What did he suggest? Let's go see a drag show at a gay club, which sounded far more wholesome than a burlesque show. But I told my friend I was going to pass because, again, it's not my thing. He begged and he begged. My friend is a gay man, and at that time, he was going through a hard time trying to mend a broken heart. I could see in his eyes how badly he wanted to step away from his struggles and enjoy the drag show. So grudgingly, I went into the basement nightclub. I was so nervous. I was so afraid. I could barely even sit. I stood in a corner with my arms folded. There were so many men in that place. Am I safe? I said to myself. My friend was somewhere flirting. The drag queens started coming out, singing and dancing. Wow, I thought, look at their dresses. That's a lot of hair. I wish I could do my makeup that good. This is so much fun. Before I knew it, I forgot I was in a gay bar. I was in awe of this drag culture. I wanted to know everything about it. So why was I afraid to go in the first place? I suppose I could claim that it's because I don't like loud music, which is true. I could say it's because I don't drink alcohol and I don't care for bars, and that is true also. But the thing is that if someone has said to me, Imbolo, there's a group of Africans there having a loud dance party, come with us, there'll be lots of alcohol, I would have gone in a second. I wouldn't have cared about how loud the music was because they were Africans. I still wouldn't have drank the alcohol, but I wouldn't have stood in a corner wondering if I was safe. The reason I was afraid of entering a burlesque club or going to see a drag show was because I did not know what goes on in places like that, and I was afraid of taking the risk and finding out. People say the problem with America is racism and classism and sexism and a host of other isms. But what we don't talk about enough is that one of the root causes of all these isms is the shortage of curiosity. We are just not curious enough right now. We are not curious enough about each other to do the hard work of finding out who they are. We are not curious enough to ask questions, to question the things we've heard, the stories we've been told. We prefer to cling to our identities and say, I'm an X, so I don't do Y. We stick to our kind because it's safe. But how far will that take us? Look at what it's doing to us, how afraid it's making us, how much it's depriving us of life-transforming experiences. In the absence of curiosity, what are we left with? Fear, and a determination to destroy that which we are afraid of. Lock them up, we say to people who don't know. Take away their rights to choose. Ostracize them for being gay. Shame them for being overweight. Throw them in immigration detention. Ridicule them for being poor. Punish them for all the ways they fail to be normal like the rest of us. We have become what a friend of mine calls a punishmentalist society, because we don't take the time to hear a story so that we can show mercy. And what are we without mercy, except animals ripping each other apart? Curiosity, though, should not be confused with useless inquiries, by which I mean asking questions of the other person just because you want to know. A couple of months ago, I was moderating a panel of immigrants in Kitsap County, and an audience member asked the panelists, "What is your least favorite question to be asked by an American?" The panel was in agreement on the question they most dislike: where are you from? On the surface, it's such a simple question. Tell me what country you're from. And yet, what those panelists hear, what I often hear is, you are not from here. You're not one of us. Identify yourself. Who are you? And that happened to me just this past week. I was walking down the street in Manhattan, and a man comes up to me. I'm standing on the street corner, and he says, "Oh, the weather looks really nice today." And I said, "Yes." The moment I opened my mouth, the topic changed from the weather to, "Where are you from?" And well, it turns out he wanted more than talk about the weather. I wanted to know, whether I was single or married. And when I told him that somebody put a ring on it, he said, "Have a nice day." But the question of where are you from is just, I find it very deflating, and so did these immigrants on this panel. But that question, in the proper context, in a context where the questioner recognizes that they're talking to another human, that the human is more than an immigrant. It is a human who has a lot more to share besides the story of why they left their country. It is a wonderful question. It is a conversation many of us love to have. I love to talk about the beautiful country that is Cameroon. But being an immigrant so often strips you of that, the right to be recognized as more than a curiosity in another man's country. Years ago, while I was working in a nonprofit in New York, one of my coworkers said to me, "I've lived my whole life in my neighborhood. I was born here, I went to school here, I got married here, I'm going to die here. I don't want to ever leave it." I was astounded. After many years of being a foreigner and being surrounded by foreigners in my private life, I had forgotten that there are people who have never been foreigners, who never left in search of more. What is it like to have such a life, to have never left home? I asked myself that question again during my visit last year home, as I was looking at my cousins and my friends. Imagine such a thing, I said to myself. Imagine what it is like to never have had to struggle to be at home in another man's homeland. But how often do we spend time imagining the lives of others? The word empathy is a big one these days, but empathy can only truly do its job when identities step aside so that all what remains is just a human being a human. When my novel was published in 2016, Washington Post in their review called it the one novel Donald Trump should read. So I was asked often, Imbolo, do you agree with that title? Why should Mr. Trump read your novel? It was a rather tough question for me to answer. Does he read novels? Does he read any kind of books? I don't know the guy. I really don't know whether he reads books. What I'll say about Mr. Trump is that his rhetoric has pushed me to look at myself, to consider my own identities. The week after he was reported to have insulted African countries, calling them an explicit, dirty word, supposedly, the week after that happened, I received a request from a national radio program to come on air to discuss if I, as an African immigrant, thought the president was racist. I thought about the invitation, I pondered it. Ultimately, I asked my publicist to thank the program on my behalf and declined the invitation. Not long after that, I was asked by a white person if I thought Mr. Trump was a racist. My response was along the lines of, please don't ask me such a question again. It's not that I don't believe we should have a conversation about the topic. We need to hold our leaders accountable. And if they don't champion our shared values, we should condemn their words and actions. I am the native of a country where we've had the same dictator for 36 years. And even as a child, I was deeply aware of what little freedom of speech we had. When I came to America and saw people could stand on the street and criticize the president, I was in awe. So I do not take my right to speak out lightly. What concerns me about having conversations regarding Mr. Trump's divisiveness is that in spending so much time talking about him, we spend too little time talking about our own shortcomings, the ways in which our own identities are affecting how we treat other humans. What do we identify with? How does our identity shape our principles? What notions do we perpetuate in the way we live, the choices we make? So Mr. Trump is racist, but what about our own bigotry? So he's sexist and prejudiced against immigrants and the disabled, but what about our own prejudices? Are we all so blameless? Are there not many among us who are benefiting from the very racist system that the likes of him are protecting? Why not talk about that? Why not talk about our own complicity in upholding systems where all people are not treated equally? The world is not going to get better if only other people stop doing this and start doing that. Things are not going to get better if others start behaving more like us. How did we get to this moment in America? Because some people looked at others and said, it's their fault. They're messing up our country. Let's elect somebody who is going to fix the problems that they're causing, because we are blameless. But are we truly blameless? I know I'm not. And I'm convinced that change is only going to come when we all start considering the ways in which we are contributing to the brokenness of this country. It won't be a pretty process. Being brutally honest with ourselves is not a fun thing to do. But America needs it, and this country is so worth fighting for. Thank you.
We'll return for the rest of the event with Imbolo Mbue in just a moment. But first, we wanted to let you know that our new season is on sale now, featuring events with Louise Erdrich, Daniel James Brown, Maggie Nelson, and many more. And also, Summer Book Bingo has begun. This free summer reading program for adults is a collaboration with the Seattle Public Library, and this year's board was illustrated by local artist Tessa Halls. Subscribe to our season and download your free Summer Book Bingo board at lectures.org. And now, more from Imbolo Mbue.
So, Imbolo, we're so excited to have you here, and you know, I don't know about all of you. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have had an opportunity to read Behold the Dreamers yet?
Oh, wow.
Look at that.
Thank you.
And I can tell just by your response in listening to her speak, there's some books right there that the rest of you will be picking up a copy on the way out, yes?
Thank you.
You know, just listening to you speak and having read the book, so much of your compassion, your humor, your activism, your feminism, all of that is really represented so well in Behold the Dreamers and in the complex characters that you've portrayed. We have some questions that have come in that we're going to get to. If you have questions that are coming up, make sure to write them on a card and give them to one of the ushers that are walking down, or you can continue to use the app Slido and we'll see the questions that way. And as you're continuing to send your questions to us, we're just going to go ahead and start some of the conversation. You know, I know that you mentioned that you started writing the book in 2011. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And as you were talking about some of the experiences in your life, having come over from Cameroon, having experienced the immigration process here, how much of the things in your life do you feel really started the catalyst for this story? What was the first thing?
I think for me it was what's the word? Like questioning America, you know, that sense of feeling as if America was not what I thought it would be, and thinking maybe I'm better off going back home. I think that happened at my lowest moment in the country after I finished college, like I said, when I was selling vacuum cleaners from door to door, and I said, did I really come here for this? Is this worthwhile? You know, like you give up so much to come to this country. You know, you give up your home, your friends, being like everybody else in your country. You know, not worrying about being different, having an accent, and all of that. And then you come here and you look at your life and you think, did I give up everything for this? And I think that was like a big moment for me. And also seeing a lot of my friends questioning that, like, is America really worthwhile? And which is something that the characters in my novel, question also, like, is America worthwhile? And the issue of poverty, because like I said, just the poverty I saw in America was just so brutal, so brutal and so relentless. And it's and seeing how hard it is to get out of it also. Because people say, oh, look at you worked hard and now you're a best-selling novelist. But, it's such a price to pay, There's such a price to pay, and you wonder, do I want to pay this price?
I want to touch upon a couple of things that you just brought up because, as immigrants, there's a fine line that you're consistently straddling, right? You have one foot in one home, one foot in another. And I know you talked a lot about defining home, and you see that in the characters in Behold the Dreamers, specifically with the Jonga family. That's the question that they're battling. We're coming here, we have one dream in mind, this idea of the American dream, and it shifts. I know you just talked about poverty, and I'd love to talk about that in a moment. What else do you think shifts in terms of an ideal of the American dream, and what happens when you're really here?
Well, so the characters in my novel, they also, have to deal with legal status. So that is compounded, And people say to me when I do events around the country, they say, "Oh, Imbolo, I had no idea how hard it is to not have papers." It's like, you have no idea. It is very, very difficult, to not have papers, and to like the character of Jende Jonga, who not only does not have papers, but he is in danger of being deported. It is very hard. So I think a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to get papers until they get here. You think you go to America and you file papers and then you become a citizen. But the process is very, very long and very challenging, and you need a really good lawyer. Like the characters in my novel, they don't have a good lawyer. So the documentation situation is also very hard.
How was the immigration process for you? Was it also as difficult?
Yeah, mine wasn't. I didn't come to asylum. I had relatives who sponsored me, so it was nothing like theirs. And I'm a citizen now.
Right.
So while I had my challenges, at least, I had a green card at a certain point. But the characters in my novel, they also, they're black. They don't have papers. The poor, gender is not very educated, and it's a lot. It's a lot of hurdles to climb. To get to that mountain top of achieving the American dream. And that's something that gender realizes that, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be.
So that's the big thing, right? Once you're here, it is much more of a difficult process. Yeah. One thing that I wanted to take the opportunity to do, I'd love to keep talking about the book, but also I just want to talk a little bit about you and your process as a writer and in developing this book. But you wrote the book, it came out, it was published in 2016, and this was your debut novel. And in 2017, she was already on Oprah's book club and was given the PEN/Faulkner Award, which is an award that is specifically for fiction writers. It's for who is defined as the best novelist, and it is considered one of the most highly regarded awards because it's all peer considered. And that award is given specifically to American citizens. So just 3 years after you got your citizenship, she received this award, which is pretty amazing. And people are probably like, wow, this novel came out and you wrote it in just 3 years, but how long have you been writing? When did you first start writing?
Yeah, well, it took me 5 years to write it. And it took me maybe 14 years to learn how to write. So people say, oh, you didn't take a writing class and you're such a great writing. That is because I spent years learning how to write by myself. And it wasn't pretty. I mean, my early writing is atrocious. I mean, I wouldn't let anybody see it. But I just had to do it over and over. And I mean, I think even as a child, I always enjoyed writing, but I didn't think that writing is something people do as a career. Nobody in my town said, oh, I want to be a writer. It just didn't exist. Like even now, people back at home, they say, what do you mean you're a writer? What is that? Because it's just, not something that people do where I come from. So I never considered that it was an option for me until, one day when I was, after college, I read Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. And I loved it so much, and I started writing as a hobby. And I was thinking, well, I will write as a hobby, and then I'll go to graduate school and get a PhD and become a college professor and have a respectable job, because that is much better than being a writer. And that it didn't work out for me. That dream fell apart. I never got a PhD. I just ended up being a writer.
But it seemed to work out really well. We have some questions about your writing from the audience, and so here's one. You've shared that you taught yourself to write also by reading some of the Oprah Book Club novels. Did you have any particularly favorite ones off of the Oprah book list?
Yeah, well, Song of Solomon was an Oprah book club also.
Okay.
I definitely loved Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections, which came out many years ago. I loved Barbara Kinsova's The Poisonwood Bible. So back in those days, I just read. I also wasn't very exposed to American literature. So Oprah's book club was my first experience of reading American novelists, because I grew up just mostly reading African writers and a lot of the British writers. So when I discovered Toni Morrison, I thought, oh my God, Americans know how to write. let me read more of their work.
So what are the steps that you take when you're writing? So this book is, I think it's a 382-page novel. That's a lot of writing. How does that happen? When are you making an outline? Do you start with one idea? Do you just let it go? We'd love to hear about your process.
No, I just write until it's done. There's no I just write and rewrite and rewrite. I have no process whatsoever. That's probably not a good answer you want to hear, but I have no process. I had an inspiration, and I'll tell you, back when I was unemployed, I went for a walk one day, walking down the street, and I saw these chauffeurs on the corner of the street, and I thought, wow, oh my God, chauffeurs. Who has chauffeurs? I don't know anybody who has a chauffeur. I don't know anybody who works as a chauffeur. But the idea of having a chauffeur or working as a chauffeur, I thought it was very interesting. So I went home, and I said to my husband, who has a chauffeur? And he said, the Wall Street guys. I said, oh, so I'm going to write a story about the Wall Street guy who has a chauffeur. And because the chauffeurs I saw, they look like Africans, I thought the chauffeur is going to be an African immigrant. And I was thinking, so Lehman Brothers just happened, and I thought, oh, I'm going to write a story about a Wall Street guy and his chauffeur, and what if the Wall Street guy is a Lehman Brothers executive? Mm-hmm. So that's how the whole thing came together, and then I did a Google search of a chauffeur's job description, and I found that you pick the wife, take her to her opera, you take the children to soccer game, whatever, that kind of stuff, and from then it was mostly just being very nosy, as far as learning about people's lives, because I've never been a chauffeur. I don't know the 1%. I don't have any friend with a 1%. So I had to write about these people that I knew so little about the world. Whenever I met somebody from that world, I'll say, oh, where did you go for vacation? Oh, I went to St. Bart's. And I say, oh, that's where the vacation, Or, if I go to their houses, I'll notice, what things look like and the way they talk, So all of it was just, making files in my head of this world. For the African immigrants, it was easy because, they're from my town, they lived in Harlem like I used to, but I had to be very, very cautious about writing about the wealthy white family, which was the hardest part about writing this novel because it was very obvious that I did not love them the same way I love the African immigrants. I was very judgmental towards them, and you could tell the book was rejected over and over because people are like, it's so clear that you don't like these people. Why do you care to tell their story? And my defense was, why should I like them? They're rich white people. Did they have any problems? Their life is good. And I didn't even realize that, I was making the worst mistake by judging them. Right. Instead of just telling their story. So I had to go through this process of leaving my judgment at the door. To say that there's no way I can write the book I wrote if I kept on judging them.
So that's a great lesson that all of the writers in the room can take is you have to leave your judgment at the door. You have to love your characters. And you've done such a great job with those characters.
You don't have to love them. You just have to tell their story.
You just have to tell their story. All right, that's fair. You don't have to love them.
I don't think I love them so much. But I think that I care. I wish them well. I want to. People ask me all the time, oh, Imbolo, how similar are you to Jende Jonga, who is an immigrant? How similar are you to Nani Jonga? They don't ask me how similar are you to Clark Edwards, because they think, what could you possibly have in common with a wealthy Wall Street executive man, white man? But the thing is that after spending 5 years writing this book, I see myself in him.
Yeah.
Right? And after spending so much time, the wife, Cindy Edwards, was the hardest character to write because she's not easy to like.
Yeah.
And so she made me a better writer. Because when you write somebody who is so not easy to like, you really have to go really deep to see, the humanity. And if you don't see it, then you cannot write it.
And you've done such a beautiful job of making all of those characters very, very well-rounded. And I just have to point out, especially for this Seattle audience, there's a really rare experience that you can have. You can read this novel and experience that world. And also right now at Book It Theater, there is a world premiere production that opens tomorrow of Behold the Dreamers. And so you can see that whole world interpreted through Myra Platt, the director and the playwright there. And I have to ask you, as an artist, you spent 5 years creating this whole world. And this isn't actually the first time it's been adapted. It was actually adapted into an opera first. Is that correct?
In Poland. I didn't see it. I just heard it was good. It was a Polish opera, Behold the Dreamers.
But so you didn't get to see it there, but it's been adapted once. So is tomorrow the first time that you're going to get to see a world that you created adapted by somebody else?
Yes, but I think because people say, how are you going to feel seeing your book on stage? I think I don't have any expectation because I don't claim this story as my story. I wrote the book, but it's not my story because people gave me this story. This story was inspired by so many people who I met and things they told me and what I saw, and it was all other people's lives that I kind of put together to write this story. So in a way, as long as they play or whatever, it's also been an option for a movie. As long as whatever they do there is true to the people whose story represents, I'm fine with it. It doesn't have to, it's not about me. I don't know, I've kind of separated myself that this is not my story. This is the story that I was given to tell.
It's a story to share. And actually on story, just a question about that, our relationship to the stories that we tell constantly shift. So where are you in your relationship to Behold the Dreamers now versus when you started?
Yeah, I think because the story had been so interpreted and analyzed, and everybody has all these symbolisms that I never saw or intended, It's like I have it's not my story anymore. That's what I mean. I mean, people have come to me and said things like, this is what this means, right? Or this is what you're trying to do here, right? No, I never thought about that. But because like I'll give an example. There's a character in the novel. It's a very minor character. Her name is Anna, and she's a housekeeper to the Edwards family, the wealthy family. And the whole time I'm writing this novel, I could hear Anna's voice very clearly. She has a foreign accent, but I never had a sense of what she looked like. And so I was telling a friend of mine, I said, I think I finally figured out, what Anna is. I think Anna is like, Eastern European. And my friend said, what are you talking about? She's Filipino. What can I say? Okay, she's Filipino, you know better than me.
Oh my! So I love that we're getting such a great sense of how you created all of these characters in Behold the Dreamers. Now you have another project coming up that you've been working on. Is that right? Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. So it is as far from Behold the Dreamers as possible. It is way, way darker. It is. I'm not quite done with it, but I'm more comfortable talking about it now. It is about what happens when a small African village decides to fight against an American oil company that is polluting the land. Yeah. Yeah, it's a ruthless story. I mean, it's broken me to pieces writing it. It's been a very, very, very difficult novel to write, but I'm almost done.
Wow, so
we'll be looking forward to watching out for that. I want to touch upon some of the questions because we have some great questions that were delivered by the audience. We have here, I think, and this is coming from all of the wonderful words that you just shared with us. How would you encourage interconnection and interdependence between people who are different rather than an ongoing obsession with individuality and success and I think you started speaking to that a little bit by talking about curiosity and the necessity of curiosity. Can you speak to that a little bit more? Are there other ways in which you think we can work better?
Right. Well, I think because I have struggled myself and I've seen, like I told the story about like being afraid to go into a gay bar, being afraid to go into a burlesque show, and it's always justifying like, this makes sense, right? But not realizing that, I could be more open to the world. And Behold the Dream has only happened because I was open to the world. I think that, because I was in a new country and I had to be open in order to get where I wanted to get to. But I have learned that I couldn't have written this story if I wasn't curious about people. From the moment I came to America, when I came to college, I wanted to, my friend, the gay guy I mentioned, that was one of my first friends when I came to America, and I was curious about him. I was curious about other, religions. The church I went to was mostly Korean American church. At one point, I went somewhere and I met this guy. He was from West Virginia, and I was like, wow, West Virginia. And he, I hope it doesn't sound wrong, but he had this long beard, and I just had this fantasy that I'll marry him one day and I'll move to West Virginia and I would like live in West Virginia and become a hippie, because I was just very curious about that world. So I think that fascination with America, because there was so much to learn, so much to see, so many different kinds of people, like it always created in me a hunger to know more.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I wasn't afraid, because obviously the things that I haven't done yet, like I live in New York City, but I still had never gone to a burlesque show. But I think I'm always trying to push myself to say, I want to know more about these people. And that is what happened with writing Behold the Dreamers, because when I started writing the novel, the hard part was that I wasn't curious enough about the life of a Wall Street executive, because it was like, I know what they like. They have money, they work on Wall Street. Like I have my stereotype that I think of them and I stuck to it. I didn't wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, I want to be empathetic to a rich guy. It wasn't like that. But because the story demanded that I be empathetic, people say to me, oh, this novel is so empathetic, but it wasn't natural. It wasn't easy. It was it was searching myself and seeing that I have my own judgments, I have my own bigotry, and that unless I work on that, I can never write the story.
That self-examination of self is so important, and we need to do it. All of us need to do that in order to come together.
Right.
We have time for just one other question. I wanted to ask you, and this has been coming through in a number of the questions. It seems that we have a lot of inspired writers in the room. What would your advice be to writers in the room, and specifically to some of the female writers in the room, in terms of how to get out there and write, how to get published?
Well, the writing is different from the publishing, right? Because you could write all you want and you might not care about being published. The writing part is, it's to just do it over and over. I mean, I spent 14 years learning how to write. And maybe because I wasn't so stuck on being published, that really helped me. I was writing for myself in the beginning. I discovered that, oh my God, I can write, and I'm going to just do it because I love it and I enjoy it. The publishing thing came years later after I lost my job. And so I didn't have that pressure of being published like other people do. I didn't go to MFA program. I didn't do anything.
So how did it happen? Because you got a $1 million deal with Random House, right?
Yes, it was a lot of money. Yeah. But it was, so that happened because there's agents, right? So I didn't sell my book, I have an agent.
So you have to get an agent. So how do we get the agent?
But I should talk about the rejection, because people, people don't talk about the fact that I was rejected 1 million times by every agent in the country. Like everybody rejected me, not because they didn't like me, but because they could see that I had potential and I hadn't realized my potential. And so it was always like, go back and do it again. And I think a lot of writers are so desperate to be published. They want to just put anything out there. Right. And I did not have that. I wanted to be an excellent writer first. So I took my time to write, to learn how to write. And then when I kept on getting rejected, I realized that I really, really had to learn how to write. And until my work was really excellent, and then I got an agent, and then, she sold the book in 4 days, which is why it went for a lot of money.
In 4 days?
Yeah.
She sold the book in 4 days.
But that is because at that point, I had learned that, publishing is not, the ultimate thing. The ultimate thing is to be an excellent writer.
Can you say that again? Publishing is not the most important thing. Yeah. What is?
To be an excellent writer.
To be an excellent writer.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful note and some great advice to give to all of the young writers in the room. I think we should all just take a moment to give Imbolo Mbue a huge round of applause and thank her for her time.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was truly a joy to hear from Imbolo Mbue in 2019 and to share her talk on the podcast today. Thank you to the Seattle Arts and Lectures staff, board, and community, and thanks to all of you for listening. This show would not be possible without you. Our show is produced by Jack Straw Cultural Center with theme music by Daniel Spills. To hear more, subscribe from wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, rate and review us 5 stars so that more people can enjoy Sal on Air.